When we see Bloomfield's modern, well-appointed, and well-staffed public schools of today, we realize we are a long way from the beginning of the schools of Wintonbury. We are going to take you way back from the present-day schools of Bloomfield and consider how education grew and evolved from its colonial inception to a more inclusive community position. In the early 1600s, the Founding Fathers placed great value upon education. This was for no profound intellectual purpose. Rather, it was so that all children would be able to read Scripture, have a proper upbringing, be knowledgeable of the law, and find honest work. Education found its roots in the Puritans' religious values, it being one of the chief projects of that old deluder Satan to keep men from the knowledge of the Scriptures, a quote repeated frequently in the histories of Windsor. Satan was a reality to these people, a reality who was determined to destroy God's church in the new land. Education that enabled one to fortify oneself with the strength of biblical readings was a necessity. In 1700, a Connecticut law was passed requiring all towns of 70 families to maintain an English school for the entire year. Towns with fewer families for half a year. All people were taxed to maintain these schools, even if parents taught their children themselves at home and didn't send children to public schools. This caused a lot of dissatisfaction. The schools were under the control of the Ecclesiastical Society of the Congregational Church. The new Connecticut Constitution, adopted in 1818, separated church and state, but learning the catechism was still compulsory until 1821. These common schools, as they were called, would teach a common curriculum that would give each student, rich or poor, an equal chance to learn. A school where Americans were made. Common schools would be free, provide the highest quality of education, and would be 100% funded by tax dollars. Need for chairs with backs, blackboards, and standardized texts for all schools was recommended. In 1795, after Connecticut sold its land in the Western Reserve, the Connecticut General Assembly passed a law requiring all towns be divided into districts. Voters divided Wintonbury into 7 school districts. Later, 2 additional districts were added when the Scotland area was annexed to Bloomfield. The schools were sparsely furnished, wooden benches, no blackboards, and few texts. The Bible and the New England Primer were the reading materials. It was assumed that anyone who had completed common school should be able to teach, so the quality of the teachers varied. Bloomfield records indicate it was common for a teacher to remain in a school for only 1 year. Older children had school 4 months in the winter, and classes were held for younger children during spring and summer. By 1798, the need for school supervision became apparent, and 9 persons were appointed to serve as a visiting committee in each district. Twice a year, the committee visited the school, and the class and teacher were questioned and criticized. For a teacher to remain on the job, a positive performance was necessary. Pupil punishment was severe and often repeated at home. Most colonial students, both boys and girls, learned enough arithmetic to manage household expenses. This was complicated because currency was based on British monetary units: farthing, pence, guinea, shilling, and pound. Printed books were scarce. Hornbooks were the most important tool used during colonial education. A hornbook consisted of a piece of parchment, usually pasted onto a small wooden board with a handle and covered with a thin plate of transparent horn, from where the name hornbook was derived. Reading and writing skills were learned from the alphabet detailed on a hornbook. The hornbook was durable and inexpensive. It could display the alphabet in both small letters and capital letters. The Lord's Prayer in English was also included on the hornbook, together with the mark of the cross. The alphabet detailed on the hornbook was known as crisscross row or crisscross. The New England Primer was the first reading primer designed for the American colonies. It became the most successful educational textbook published in 17th century colonial United States, and it remained in use for more than 150 years. The primer had two parts. One, Westminster Catechism of Puritan Beliefs. 2, Spiritual Milk for American Babes, drawn from the breasts of both testaments for their souls' nourishment. Noah Webster's Blue-backed Speller was published in 1783 and was widely used in New England and elsewhere for more than a century. It was entirely secular by design, contrasted with the New England Primer. Let's have a look at the individual school districts. South Middle District. The school was situated on Gillette Street, now Cottage Grove Road, on what is now the Gillette Ridge Condominium Complex. The frame building had a marble slab over the door that read, "This district is indebted to Francis Gillette for his zeal and determination in getting up plans and superintending the work." A notice from Connecticut Current, October 10, 1796. The inhabitants of Windsor and its vicinity are hereby informed the middle school in Wintonbury society is now opened, where will be taught the languages, reading, writing, and arithmetic. The price of tuition is as follows. In the languages, 1 shilling 4 per week. That of arithmetic connected with reading at 1 shilling 2, and reading and writing at 1 shilling. Further information may be had of David Grant, Committeeman, Windsor, October 8. Northeast District. We have no image of this school on Philly Street, and the exact site is unknown. Old maps locate it near the Newberry residence. Southwest District. The original school was a wood frame building that burned and was replaced by a trap rock structure in 1851, costing $288.15. The low cost was in part due to the fact that much of the labor was done by the town poor. After the old school burned, while waiting for the new building to be completed, classes were held in the Madison Cadwell House across the street. A convenient arrangement, since the teacher was daughter Elizabeth Cadwell. The Southwest District School was used for 63 years until 1921, and during these years it was also used for a variety of purposes such as prayer meetings, Sunday school, Salvation Army revivals, and Temperance Society meetings. It still stands on Simsbury Road. Center District. The school, built about 1795 and in use until 1873, was located on Whirlwind Hill, just west of Mountain View Cemetery, as seen on the 1869 map. Built of brick, it was described as having low, uncomfortable desks. After 1873, the district moved classes into the old academy that had been purchased for $1,500. North Middle District. An early school stood near the corner of Tunxus Avenue and Ridgeview Drive. The teacher boarded at the nearby Sally Brown House that is still standing. Doncaster District. The first structure was a wood frame building on a triangle of land at Goodwin and Moore's Corner. The second was built in 1856, 1 mile north, on the east side of Doncaster Road. This building was used until 1926, when, to make room for the third school building, it was moved to West Street and remodeled as a private residence. The third building was used as a school until the early 1930s. It was then used by the veterans of foreign wars, and in 1963 it was purchased by the Tunxis Grange. It has since been turned into a private residence. Old Farm District. The Brick School, as it was called until 1839, was one of the 5 planned for Wintonbury in 1795. It was used as a school until 1922. According to old school records, the school had a fine bell that called the townspeople together for many years. It first rang for the funeral of Mr. Frederick Bull, the person who presented the bell. Scotland South District. No image is available, but an 1869 map locates it on the northeast corner of Doncaster and Adams Roads. Scotland North District. This school was built in 1826, across from Old St. Andrew's Church, on land owned by George Mitchelson. In 1891, the school closed when its few remaining students were transferred to Scotland South School. In 1969, the old Scotland North building was moved to Simsbury and is located on the Simsbury Historical Society's Massico Plantation. In 1910, the town decided to combine the Scotland North and Scotland South districts into a more central location. A brick schoolhouse was built near the northern end of Doncaster Road. When the Bloomfield schools were consolidated in the early 1930s, the pupils were transferred to the Centre Grammar School. At that time, the brick school was converted into a residential dwelling that is still occupied. In addition to the original 9 district schools, at times there were more. The Gravel Hill School. Children living in the southeast section of Wintonbury had a long distance to go to a town school. The Gravel Hill School District was established in June 1835. It included part of Hartford's Northwest District and part of Wintonbury's Old Farm District. Spanning the town line, it seemed to be a constant source of conflict. In 1885, it was the subject of a legal suit challenging its boundaries. The court at the time upheld the right of Bloomfield to alter the boundaries of its school districts. No image of the school is available. Mitchelson School. Due to the increased number of school-aged children in the north central part of town, many from transient workers in the tobacco fields, it became necessary in 1919 to build a school in this area. On land donated by George Mitchelson, a 2-room schoolhouse was built on the west side of Blue Hills Avenue, just north of Woodland Avenue, near the site of the present Metropolitan Learning Center. The school was closed in 1941, when the school population decreased and the smaller schools were consolidated. School buses getting to this school had always had difficulty with the muddy roads. The academy, previously mentioned, was the most successful of the several attempts to establish a private school in the mid-19th century. Financed by the sale of shares, the school on Wintonbury Avenue flourished for a few years, but classes were discontinued prior to the purchase of the building by the Centre School District in 1873 to replace the unpopular school on Whirlwind Hill. It later became the Centre Fire Station. During this period of district development and school building, the quality of education was constantly debated, as was the matter of taxation to pay for it. It was realized that good education requires that pupils be grouped and taught by grade, not all together that had been the practice. The religious overtones were weakening, and secular emphasis was almost universal by the beginning of the 20th century. In the last half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, there was increasing attention to compulsory school attendance and to the preparation of teachers. In 1856, school societies were abolished, and the obligation of each school district was transferred to the town. Better methods of teaching were introduced, since it was felt that education was more than rote memory of texts or lectures. Schools were expected to teach more than the 3 R's. Greek or Latin was introduced to prepare for college in the secondary schools. Discipline was a problem in the late 19th century. Visitor reports often mentioned, at the beginning of a term, scholars tend to see how much they can get away with regarding their new teacher. The 1890 School Visitor Report stated, "The lady teachers are generally very good in their teaching and have faculty of controlling the scholars pleasantly. Their government is generally successful, including the boys. Notwithstanding, some boys need a man's government. They answer back using disrespectful language and often raise a laugh among the boys, by which they suppose the teacher is made to appear ridiculous. This may result in the teacher not being rehired. Boys understand very well that men do not take such language kindly, and the use of it will speedily produce unpleasantness. Submission to good authority has an important influence upon the character." The Center Grammar School for all town students, containing grades 1 through 9, opened in 1913 on Jerome Avenue, at the site of the present post office. The building of the Blue Hill School in 1922 relieved population pressures in the center school. These new schools were considered quite advanced, with inside lavatories, steam heat, and assembly halls. By 1922, motor school bus transportation had started, allowing pupils from distant districts to be transported to Center and Blue Hills grammar schools. By 1921, all available school space was in use, and some classes were held in the parish hall of the Methodist Church and the town hall, and later in the Masonic Hall and the academy as well. Before the first high school was built, Bloomfield students attended high school in West Hartford, East Hartford, Hartford, and Simsbury. When West Hartford stopped admitting any new students, Bloomfield was forced to create a high school, partitioning off some rooms in the Jerome Avenue School for freshman and sophomore classes. The high school space was cramped. The science program was in the basement next to the boiler room, and coal bin, both completely exposed. The first Bloomfield High School was built on Park Avenue in 1930 and used until the present high school was built on Huckleberry Lane in 1956. It was then used for the Board of Education administrative offices. The new police department was built on the site of the original high school. When the new high school on Park Avenue opened in 1930, the space pressure was relieved and smaller district schools were closed, leaving 3 larger schools, Blue Hills, Center, and the high school. By this time, there was emphasis on more practical education, such as being able to write a good business letter and sentence construction, so one could express oneself better in public. By mid-20th century, it was expected that all youth would attend high school and be expected to graduate. But the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II, caused many changes to education. Following the war, many new schools were constructed in town, partly because of the increase in population. This concludes our review of early Wintonbury Bloomfield schools. After World War II, the growth of the town resulted in a marked increase in the school population, requiring more classroom space. An addition to the Blue Hill School was constructed. Then came the new high school. Wintonbury Meta Comet, Laurel, and Vincent elementary schools were built, replacing Center School. A junior high school and later the Carmen A. Race Middle School followed. The Bloomfield school system has evolved in ways unimagined by early educators, but its foundation is based on their early belief that public education was critical for the development of an informed population.